Did you know Toyota sells a time machine? This is the 4x4 that defies time. It is the beloved Toyota Land Cruiser 76 series. This is the wagon version, but you can get it in a bunch of different body shapes. You can get it in a ute, you can get it as a troop carrier, which is a 2-seater work van, or you can get it in this more family-focused 5-seater wagon. But the Toyota Land Cruiser 76 series is so popular because it is exactly what people want in a modern Toyota. They want all the hardware, they want it to be reliable, they don't want any complicated technology, they simply want to buy an older car that's built in 2024 and you can buy in a Toyota showroom, which is this exact car. Now the 76 series recently got an update and it means you get a few fancy features that might upset some Land Cruiser purists, but to some other buyers who want some newer technology in a car that costs over $80,000, well, you get some nicer amenities that makes it easier to live with. But before you buy a Toyota Land Cruiser or any car for that matter, make sure you visit productreview.com.au because there you're going to be able to read reviews from owners who have bought and lived with cars like the Toyota Land Cruiser. And you're also able to review your own car there as well to let everyone know what it was like to live with your car. But how much does this Land Cruiser cost? Well, this Toyota Land Cruiser 76 Series GXL wagon, which is the top of the range wagon variant, which gives you 4 doors and 5 seats, is going to cost you over $79,000 before on-road costs. So keep this in mind that this car is going to cost you over $80,000 if you want to buy this exact model. But before I even tell you what features you're getting for over $80,000, it's no secret that this thing is bare bones, and most people buy this Land Cruiser and don't even drive it. Instead, they drive it straight to their local workshop and get a bunch of different modifications done to it to make it even more capable and more livable. And so that means once you're done modifying this thing, some people get the total cost of their Land Cruiser up to $90,000 to $100,000 and maybe even beyond that. And that does put you into Land Rover Defender territory and also Ineos Grenadier territory as well if you're looking for some alternatives that are already highly spec'd and very capable. But the reason why the Toyota is so popular is because of its well-known reputation and its reliability. Now this recently got updated and that means it ditches the V8 diesel now, and that's very controversial because the V8 diesel is dead here in Australia. You can no longer order it, but you can still option this with the 5-speed manual if you want. But before I show you under the hood, it's worth noting that yes, you do get LED lights now, which remind me a bit of the new G-Wagon, but they also do look a little bit aftermarket, but I've grown to like the look of them. They do look quite good, and they are relatively bright at night. You also get this heritage Toyota grille at the front, which I like a lot, and then you get this plastic bumper here with some chrome elements on the front to sort of show off that this is the GXL model. And then you have these gargantuan indicators up front, which I love the look of. But this is where things get controversial because this is now running a 2.8 litre 4-cylinder turbocharged diesel motor making 150 kilowatts, but it makes 500 newton meters of torque. But how does this compare to the old V8 diesel? Well, it produces 1 less kilowatt, so it's a little less powerful, but it produces a whole 70 newton meters more torque. So it is going to be a more torquey motor compared to the V8. But it's fair to say that some people might be concerned about the reliability of this motor because it's now a more highly strung 4-cylinder diesel engine instead of a big lazy V8. And of course, this is paired up to a 4x4 all-wheel drive system, and you do have diff lockers on board for the front and the rear, and this is paired up to a 6-speed automatic transmission. This 4-cylinder diesel should be pretty reliable, but I can guarantee you that the rest of this car will probably outlive you, your children, and your grandchildren because this thing is just so simple and so rugged. What else are you getting for your money? Well, you're getting this clean air intake because there is no water sealing around these joints, so I wouldn't use it as a snorkel, but it comes with your Land Cruiser GXL model. You've also got these plastic wheel arches on the side. You get 16-inch wheels, which I really like the look of, but they are wrapped in a Dunlop Grand Trek AT1 tire, which have been good for on-road driving, but we're about to test how they go on the dirt. You get some mud flaps here, and you also get a metal side step, which is tucked in nicely with the car so it shouldn't get in the way when you go off-roading. Of course, you have power adjustment now to adjust your view in your side mirrors, but if you want to fold them in, you just do that. But these doors are worth talking about by themselves because this door handle feels so nice. It's got such a solid feel to it and such a great engagement. It's something you only see on expensive old cars. And here you're getting it on the Land Cruiser, which is so nice. And it's one of my favorite door handles, if not my favorite door handle on any new car I've tested. Opening this up, you get a pretty solid door. Of course, you've got a big frame around the outside of it, but when you close it, you must slam it, because sometimes you don't close it hard enough and then it'll get stuck open halfway and your car won't want to lock. Talking about locking, this is your key. This is the exact same key I had on my 1998 RAV4, and you get it here in 2024 when you buy an $80,000 Land Cruiser. But this one has a central locking little fob, which is on the outside. But this doesn't start the car, it's simply there to lock and unlock your car like you would have found in a car about 20 years ago. But I have to say, it's much more useful than having to jam your key into this lock every time you want to lock and unlock your car. Another thing are the windows. Check out how tall they are. I know people who are a big fan of big, tall windows, and you get a great view out of this greenhouse here because of just how tall and how wide these windows are. Now, talking about suspension, you get a live axle up front, and you also do get leaf springs at the rear because this thing is designed to carry and also go off-road. And that live axle is very old school compared to the more modern stuff you're finding on some modern 4x4 SUVs. And additionally, you're not going to find many modern 4x4 SUVs that have leaf spring rear suspension in 2024. Additionally, it's also worth noting this is one of the smaller wheelbases you can get on the Land Cruiser lineup, because you're going to find the longer wheelbase on the Troop Carrier and the Ute variants of this car. And also, I love the fact this has rain gutters, just like you'd find on a G-Wagon. The wagon variant of the Land Cruiser gets this really trick two-door setup for the boot. Now, you get this smaller access door, which I like quite a lot, but then you can open it up all the way to reveal all of your boot space. Now, Toyota doesn't have an official figure with how much boot space it has, but the more impressive thing is the payload and towing capacity. This car has a payload capacity of 1,210 kilograms, and that's thanks, again, to those leaf spring rears and the fact that this is just an old school beast. The payload capacity is nearly unmatched by any other 4x4 SUV in the market, and you can tow 3.5 tons with this car, so it's so practical if you want to carry and tow things and also go off-road. Now, there is an access door here in the boot which you can use to store things, but mainly it's used for the jack and everything you need to change a spare tire, which you can find on the rear of this, because this does have a full-size spare hanging off the back, which I think looks fantastic. And you also have these little windows that pop out the back, just like you'd find on a 1998 Toyota RAV4. Now, the annoying thing with these is that if you want to open them for summer and then a massive rainstorm happens, you're gonna have to pull over and close these, because yes, they are manually operated, but at least you get some really nice airflow through the car, and it looks great to be able to pop out these windows and helps, yeah, just bring a bit of fresh air into the cabin. What's it like carrying people in the second row? It actually isn't too easy getting in the back, so you will have to use the side step and this handle to get into the rear, and the only amenities you have back here are power windows. Thank goodness, because that's something that hasn't been available in the Land Cruiser for a long time. You have these seats that have this fabric on them that I've only really felt in very old Toyotas, but at least they're still making it here in the Land Cruiser. Now, you can recline these seats quite a lot back, so you can get a really relaxed seating position, but I'm sitting behind my driving position as a 5'11" adult, and I don't have much knee room here, but I do have okay amounts of feet room, and I have lots of headroom. So it's somewhat comfortable, but it does feel pretty tight in the second row when it comes to leg space. But I love the big windows here and just the lack of anything to go wrong here. Unfortunately, there is no ISO fix points here if you want to put baby seats in the back, but you do have some tether points. But yeah, it's not going to be as easy to put baby seats in the back as some other SUVs. But Toyota have been very generous in giving us some map pockets, so that is a major plus back here. And you also have a reading light too, so it's starting to feel a little bit too luxurious in the back of the Land Cruiser. But truthfully, these seats are pretty comfortable, and that's thanks to the fact they're using this very old fabric and just old school cushioning, which isn't a bad thing. If you want to sit in the middle seat here, it's not the best seat in the house because there's pretty much no legroom at all, but you do have a flat load floor like you'd find on an electric car because this thing is so high off the ground. But I can see why you have those manually operated windows at the back, because there are no air vents back here, so it might get a bit stuffy in summer. While there are plenty of people who want to buy cars with lots of screening technology, this is for people who don't. Now, Toyota have basically been forced to put a screen in here. This is a very basic screen. It's from a third-party supplier. It's got a very poor user interface. It's really laggy and just not very nice to look at. It's not very bright, and it does suffer a bit when the sun is directly on it because the glare from the screen is not that good either. So Yeah, we have a screen, but it's only really good for Apple CarPlay, which you have to connect through a wire. So this will be what your cabin looks like when you have to connect your phone. But that does supply power, and you've also got 2 USB-C ports here and a 12-volt socket. So it's actually relatively practical to bring any electronics with you, especially if you're going camping in this thing. What I love about this car is the seating position. You're so high up in these old school fabric seats that are manually adjustable, and you just have a great view out of this cabin, and especially with this new bonnet design, it looks like you've got a very commanding presence on the road because there is so much car in front of you. You also have this really simple dashboard layout. It says Land Cruiser imprinted in the plastic with a very old school clock next to it, which I love quite a lot. So there's a lot of old school charm in here, including the manually operated climate controls with these old school switches, which just feels so nice to engage with. You've also got some controls here for the car, which are very vital for when you go off-road. So you have second start, so you can start this car in second gear. You even have power haul, which is designed to change the throttle mapping to give you a bit more power response out of this motor. You have hill descent control, you have your traction control button. This has been fitted with a trailer brake control, which you can adjust here, and it's just put neatly into the cabin. And you've also got some blank switches here, which you could probably go ahead and modify in the aftermarket for some light switches, for example. Now, of course, this is the automatic transmission. It's a beefy old thing, and it's nothing too complicated and nothing too special. But what it does mean is you get lots of storage here in the middle for things like your keys, and you've even got a little pocket here which I use to put my phone in when I'm connecting to Apple CarPlay. You even have a cup holder for things like a coffee cup, which that fits, and you have a small center cubby here which you can use to hide some bits and pieces, and a little tray in there as well. The big thing in here as well is the fact you get a steering wheel with buttons, which means you can control things like your media controls, and also there is a tiny screen here for trip information and a speedometer. So that definitely is a nice upgrade over the previous generations, but then everything else is analog, and I really do like the dash layout quite a lot. We've also got manual controls to shift into our 4x4 gears, so we got a high 2, a high 4, you got a neutral for your actual drivetrain, and then you can go into low 4. So you've got some controls here with this little gear stick, and you've also got a manual adjustment for your diff lockers, which is really nice to engage with, and everything has a great physical engagement, which is a big plus in this car. But something I will complain about is the leg room. I'm not that tall and I don't have very long legs, but they seem to find their way into the side of the door here because there's no padding here, and it becomes a bit uncomfortable when they're resting there on a long trip. And this gear selector here for the drivetrain select is actually vibrating while you're driving, and my leg tends to rest on that, so it becomes a bit of a cramped experience. Now we have some other advanced features here like autonomous emergency braking. We even have a reversing camera, and we do have lane keep assist, which is a very good thing. These are things that just make a small improvement but really help with the livability of this car. But if you want any sort of modern amenities and you're used to that in your modern 4x4 SUV and you're considering getting one of these, yeah, it's going to feel like a massive step away from that. But let's find out how this thing drives on road first. That's the most important thing when you buy a 4x4 SUVs. You got to drive on the road at some point. I thought this was going to be a very unpleasant drive, but it's actually not too bad. And that's because it's pretty comfortable on the road, but there are some things you should know about. One is the engine noise. This thing is not quiet at all. It is a very loud diesel engine. That's part of the appeal, isn't it? Another thing is the suspension. It's got a very narrow track width at the rear, so it feels like I'm sort of turning a lot quicker than I thought I would in an SUV of this size. Another thing I really like is the actual greenhouse here. I've got plenty of visibility, and even though this doesn't have any fancy blind spot monitoring or anything like that, I can still see a lot around the sides of me and even through the back, so it's not too bad. That's my water bottle rolling around in the back because there's not too much storage in this thing. But what is interesting is that this has been rattling a little bit through the dashboard, and this car has seen over 11,000 kilometers, and yeah, they're kind of rough kilometers too. So I mean, I just hope that means that this has just been beat up a bit more versus an actual build quality issue for a car that costs over $80,000. The handling's actually not too bad here. As we go through these corners, even though it's a very top-heavy SUV, you won't have to slow down too much for corners, and the suspension's pretty comfortable too. But yes, a lot of people do go to the aftermarket to make this handle even better. The big thing for me is the steering. Even though it is assisted, it does feel very loose. Like, it feels very off-roady, and that's exactly what a lot of people love about this steering here. It's designed so it doesn't kick back into your hands when you're off-roading, but it does mean when you're driving around town, you're going to be turning this thing a lot to just turn a little bit. This will require a lot of turns to go from lock to lock. Parking's pretty easy thanks to the reversing camera, but the lack of sensors at the front will make you second guess how close you are to the car in front of you. Additionally, the digital speedometer is a major plus in here because I can get nice and close to the speed limit without slowing down too much, and I can not have to stress too much about passing a speed camera even though we have a giant analog speedometer in front of me. And the driving position is really nice here. I love being this high up and I feel pretty relaxed, and these seats are actually quite comfortable too. So I'll be honest, I thought this thing was going to be a lot harder to live with, but there's another thing as well, is that the glare from the bonnet is real. This is a nice big flat bonnet, but it's also doing a great job giving me a nice tan as the sun hits it and reflects into my eyeballs. And yeah, this center screen is just a bit lame to use. I only use it to interface my phone through Apple CarPlay, but nothing more. And that's because it's really glary, it's not too responsive, and so yeah, it's useful to have it here for sure, and it's better than a phone mount, but it's not really useful. And this 6-speed transmission is nice and lazy. It is doing the bare minimum to change gears, and that's fine by me because it does a pretty good job just doing all the thinking for you. But if you want a manual, you do have the option still. And finally, this motor, it actually is pretty good at giving you a bit of power. Like, I put my foot down and we start to move, but obviously this is an unladen car, so it's not gonna be the fastest thing on the road, that's for sure. And I've been averaging around 12.6 liters per 100 kilometers, which again is not very good, thanks to this thing taking its aerodynamic influence from a brick. And I do find this shorter wheelbase with that narrow track width at the rear to be a bit darty on the road, so you really have to be focused when you're driving this thing, and you can't be as relaxed as you could be in something like a 300 series Land Cruiser. And the brakes are really not the best. They're a bit small, so you have to make sure you know your braking distances, because yeah, you could accidentally go into the back of someone if you're used to the braking ability of a modern SUV. And yeah, you can hear a lot of wind noise in this car, which is fine, but it does get a bit annoying after a while. But I've been living with this in the city and parking on the street, and it's actually not too bad to live with. But unlike a lot of Land Cruiser buyers, you can't just buy this and drive around the city. We have to see how it feels on the dirt. Now, the lane keep warning works pretty well. It does beep at you quite a lot when you sort of veer to the edge of a lane like that, and it sounds like an alarm clock. Another thing as well is that the mirrors vibrate a lot, a bit like a motorcycle, which is just, yeah, not the best quality for an $80,000 SUV. And the cruise control works pretty well. It's very simple to operate, and yeah, you just throw it on and it does a pretty good job of maintaining your speed. But I will say that this suspension setup is a bit on the rigid side, and it will shake you around a little bit, so if you are feeling a little bit ill, this is not the car to drive around town because it is pretty bumpy. Now, I'm here at my off-road proving ground because I always take my 4x4s on the same track to get a feel for how they compare to each other. Now, the Land Cruiser has a crawl ratio of around 38:1, which is apparently worse than the V8, but the automatic should make things a little bit easier as we sort of make our way slowly through this track. But this would be the typical type of trail that a 4x4 vehicle can only access, and it needs a good amount of ground clearance, and we'll see how easy the Land Cruiser can conquer this. I have good faith in this thing, but first we'll knock it into hill descent control and make our way down the hill. It's very analog, this car. We can hear a lot of switches and fuses working, and I hear the brakes being turned on and off here. I'm gonna walk my way right through the middle of these ruts, and it's working a bit faster than I would like, but it's not too bad either. I'm feeling like I'm walking pretty flat through that section there, so the wheels are articulating well in that section. I'll take it off hill descent control and we can continue on. I've got it in 4 high at the moment. Probably won't have to use the diff lockers here, but they do engage very quickly, which is nice. And if you really get into a pickle, you can use the front ones too, which is all very good. And then we do have 4 low here as well. And I love the fact that everything's a manual engagement. It feels just a little bit more exciting to use when you do need to get into a more aggressive off-road setting. Now, as I was driving in on the dirt trails to get to this track, I noticed how bumpy this thing can feel. So it's not a good overlanding setup if you want to travel fast over some dirt. It will be a bit bumpy, and I can see why people go straight away and upgrade the suspension on this thing when they buy it brand new. You can hear this thing shakes and rattles quite a lot, but that's pretty typical of some 4x4s I take through here. We're gonna go through some deeper ruts and yeah, pretty easy thing for this to conquer. That's my water bottle in the back. I apologize for that noise. It's actually working pretty well through these sections, but it is just a bit bumpy for my liking. Now, ground clearance isn't really an issue here. As we make our way through this tricky downhill section, it's just not really something that's coming to mind for me. I'm not worried about bumpers or scraping any bums on the back, even though this has already scraped its bum on a previous press trip. That wasn't me, if you do spot that in some of the video. This is just walking up this track, but oof, yeah, it feels a bit top heavy when you sort of get a bit sideways, which isn't very good. And that's been a common complaint with this wagon variant because of its smaller wheelbase and the fact it's so high off the ground. Now, because this thing is actually not that wide, it's easy to park in the city relative to other big 4x4 SUVs, but also means that it should work through this little skinny bit of the track here with no issues. So I'm gonna slowly make our way through here. Yeah, it's so easy to actually maneuver this thing around. Like, even getting into my underground garage, it's not really a problem. And this loose steering here makes it very easy to sort of just put small inputs in and not have to worry about this thing being too hard to steer when you're going on this track. Now, here's where things get a little bit more tricky, but it's nothing too bad. Just go nice and slow. But this is where we're gonna really feel the top heaviness of the Land Cruiser. Oh yeah, I wouldn't wanna be three-wheeling through here. It's not exactly the widest wheelbase here, but that engine torque is beautiful. It's just so easy to access without having to rev that much at all. And there's been no complaints from the 4x4 system at all. And in terms of like any creaking or rattling, none as we make our way through this slow section, which is really impressive. Yeah, I think the biggest advantage with the Land Cruiser wagon is its width. It's just not that wide, so it feels like I can easily access trails that I would be sweating in, say like a Land Rover or maybe even an Ineos, which feel a bit wider, but obviously they get better interior space compared to this thing. Now, you're doing this all pretty blind because this doesn't have any advanced cameras. You only have a reversing camera and that's it. So if you're a 4x4 purist, this is one of the best options out there, in the same way that driving purists love a Lotus Elise. Now, I used to be a big vocal critic of the Land Cruiser because I used to think, why would anyone spend good money on a car that's not very good to drive on the road, is slow, has inferior technology to cars at its price point, and you know what, is starting to feel a bit old. Boy, was I wrong. Living with this thing is filled with character. It is so enjoyable to drive and live with. There's something about driving an old car that you can buy brand new. It's got this old school appeal that people pay a lot of money for in a classic resto mod, but here you can have all that tactility and analog nature inside a brand new car you can buy from a Toyota showroom. So yes, this is a bit like a time machine you can buy with a Toyota badge on it. Yes, it's not perfect, but it has character, and that is something that a lot of modern cars are missing today. So if you do want a 4x4 SUV that can actually tow things and can actually carry 5 people very comfortably and has decent power, well, you can go ahead and buy a Land Cruiser with my recommendation. But if you don't need all that and just want that old school analog feel and you don't want something this big, well, you could just check out a Suzuki Jimny. But if you only care about off-road performance and you want a bit more comfort and you're prepared to spend that money in the aftermarket to bring this up to spec with some other luxurious 4x4s, well, you could consider just going and buying yourself an Ineos Grenadier or a 2-door or 4-door Land Rover Defender. But I have to say, none of those match the Land Cruiser in terms of its heritage and also its appeal. Thanks for watching. My name's Cameron. Remember, when you buy your next car, make sure you visit productreview.com.au to see if it's actually worth buying according to owners who've actually bought and lived with that car. I'll see you in the next one.